Welcome back, everyone. We are doing a deck profile today for the Razrun we're about to do. This is a Tenyi Swordsoul DPE engine kind of deck build. More specifically, tried to gear towards Supreme Sovereign instead of Baron. But anyway, we've got 3 copies of the Tenyi Spirit Adhara, their tuner monster. 1 copy of Destiny Hero Celestial for the Destiny Fusion. 3 copies of Swordsoul of Moyi. So Moyi is the one we want to see the most in our hand to potentially bring out onto the field. 2 copies of Swordsoul of Taya. So he's a good target for Baxia whenever we're trying to bring out a monster potentially. He's got a good effect to potentially banish monsters as well. 3 copies of Incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. Essentially going into any Swordsoul monster, which is really good. We've got 1 copy of Destiny Hero Dasher, just another fusion material for Fusion Destiny, but also has a good graveyard effect. 3 copies of Swordsoul Strategist Longyon. Longyon's going to be the one we go into Supreme Sovereign, Baron, potentially do some burn damage as well. 1 copy of Swordsoul Auspice Chunjin. So with Chunjin, what I've seen is, especially with the Razrun, we're going to be probably doing a lot of, trying to get their life points down. We're not going to be going against meta decks. So he's just a good way to potentially get your non-effect token replaced with a 2400 beat stick. Or potentially if you had Adhara on the field, you can go into a level 7 Synchro. So depending on what you want to do there. 3 copies of Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha. Good bounce effect, get something back to the hand. Especially when you send it from the graveyard. 3 copies of Tenyi Spirit Ashuna. So Ashuna is the one to get one of your Tenyi Spirits onto the field. So let's say you have non-effect or a Tenyi Link monster on the field. Switch that out for Swordsoul Auspice, and then you could bring out Adhara, and there's your level 7 Synchro potential right there. The only thing is, whenever you use his effects, you're locked into just worm monsters, so keep that in mind. 2 copies of Gizmek Orochi, the Serpentine Sky Slasher. So Orochi really works well with Supreme Sovereign, especially since you can use his effect during either player's turn to banish cards to then summon him onto the field. So one, you're going to boost your Supreme Sovereign and then get to activate its effect as well, as long as the opponent has something in their graveyard and on their side of the field. 1 copy of the Iris Swordsoul. So especially with running Infinite Impermanence and with the Grandmaster's effects, we're going to be negating monster effects. So during the main phase, when that's done, we could potentially bring out the Iris Swordsoul. 2 copies of Pot of Desires to potentially draw 2 cards by banishing. And again, the banishing could also help Supreme Sovereign as well as boost its attack. 2 copies of Fusion Destiny just to potentially get the Phoenix Enforcer onto the field. 2 copies. Oh, I forgot to show pictures. So there's Pot of Desires. Sorry. Fusion Destiny. And the next card, 2 copies of Vessel for the Dragon Cycle. So essentially we get to send a worm monster from the deck to the graveyard. But depending on what card we have in play, kind of what's going on, we either want to send a Tenyi or a Swordsoul. Just kind of depends on what you want to do there. 3 copies of Swordsoul Emergence just to get a Swordsoul monster to your hand, or potentially to bait an Ash Blossom. If it was potentially a meta deck, you could kind of do that. 1 copy of Swordsoul Sacred Summit to get a Swordsoul monster or worm monster, depending on what you have out on the field. 1 copy of the Heavenly Dragon Circle, so attributing a worm monster to add a worm monster from your deck to your hand. So a good way to potentially bring out either a Swordsoul or a Tenyi Spirit if you need to. 2 copies of Infinite Impermanence to negate a monster's effect that's on the field, or if it's set already, we could negate a whole entire column. And then 1 copy of Swordsoul Blackout, just to have some type of destruction while it's on the field, because we're going to have at least 1 more monster on the field at all times. Okay, so that's it for the main deck. Now for the extra deck, we have Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, essentially just a good way to pop cards during either player's turn, and he can bring himself back each turn as well. 1 copy of Yazi Evil of the Yang Zing, a good way to, again, pop himself to pop a card, and then special summon a worm monster. 1 copy of Clearwing Synchro Dragon. So right now he's in the deck because we don't have the other level 10 Swordsoul, and we don't have Psychic and Punisher. So we've got Clearwing Synchro Dragon to potentially block level 5 or higher monster effects and kind of destroy monsters that way. 2 copies of Baxia, the Brightness of the Yangzing, a good way when it's on the field to send cards back to the deck, and to also potentially go into other synchro plays or bring out other Swordsoul monsters from your graveyard. 1 copy of White Aura Whale, really only useful if we use Mo-Yi with this, but to potentially destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls and do piercing damage as well. So really only for the Razrun, because we're trying to get through these as quickly as possible. 1 Draco Berserker of the Tenyi to potentially banish and just be a huge beat stick on the field. 1 Emancipator Risen Dragite to potentially block some spell trap card effects once per turn. Probably going to be used with Mo-Yi, or if we have Mo-Yi in the graveyard, we can bring out Emancipator Risen. 2 copies of Swordsoul Grandmaster. I unfortunately don't know how to pronounce the names, so we're just going to call it Grandmaster. But essentially this is the card that we want to go into if we don't have Long One in our hands, to get him into the hand so we can go into our level 10 plays. If we already have him in the hand, then we might go into another level 8 instead, or still go with him so we have that quick effect banish effect. Next we have level 10 Baron de Fleur. Just a good Omni Negate once per time it's face up on the field, and then can pop a card each turn on your turn. And then we have the main card of this deck, Supreme Sovereign, or Swordsoul Supreme Sovereign. Essentially, you gain 100 attack and defense for each card that's banished, and your opponent loses 100 attack and defense. So the more we put into the banishment zone, the more we're going to boost our guy, the more we're going to decrease their monsters, and each turn that a card is banished, we get an effect to banish 2 more cards. 2 copies of Monk of the Tenyi, just a level 1 non-link, or a level 1 link monster to potentially activate some Tenyi effects, and then Shaman of the Tenyi to go into some different plays with cards from, brought back from the graveyard. The only thing with this is if you use her effect, you are locked into Tenyi monster effects from the extra deck. If they're summoned from the extra deck, when they're brought back from the graveyard, you can still use those effects. But yeah, that's the deck we're going to be using for the Razrun here in just a minute. So again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.